The gunshot echoed across Silver Creek, Wyoming, ricocheting between wooden buildings as the last rays of sunlight surrendered to dusk. Abigail Thornton pressed herself against the cold wall of the bank's back office, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hadn't planned to be here this late, just one more ledger to examine before leaving. Now she was frozen in place, trapped. The heavy oak door creaked open, spilling lamplight across polished floorboards. Abby ducked behind a large filing cabinet, her hand instinctively clutching the leather-bound ledger to her chest. The air felt suddenly thick with danger. Ezra Coleman's distinctive baritone filled the room. "Bring him in here. No one will disturb us." Through a narrow gap between cabinet and wall, Abby watched as Coleman, Silver Creek's wealthiest man and bank owner, stepped inside. His silver-streaked beard caught the lamplight as he adjusted his expensive vest. Behind him, Sheriff Vance dragged a bloodied man whose face was nearly unrecognizable beneath bruises and dirt. "I'll ask you one more time," Coleman said, his calm voice making the words all the more terrifying. "Where are the remaining pages of the red ledger?" The man spat blood onto the pristine floor. "Go to hell." Coleman nodded toward Vance, who delivered a vicious blow to the man's stomach. The prisoner doubled over, wheezing. "The railroad's coming, Mr. Miller," Coleman continued, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from the decanter on the desk. "Progress waits for no one. Those who stand in its path get crushed. You've killed 5 families already," Miller gasped. "No, railroad. Worth that." Abby's fingers tightened around the ledger. 5 families, just as she had suspected from the financial discrepancies she'd been tracking. Coleman sighed, placing his glass down with deliberate care. "Vance." The sheriff drew his gun and placed it against Miller's temple. Abby pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp. "Last chance," Miller whispered. "My wife has the pages. She's already gone. You'll never." The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Miller's body crumpled to the floor, blood spraying across ledgers and papers. Several droplets landed on Abby's white sleeve, blooming like crimson roses against the fabric. "Find the wife," Coleman ordered, straightening his cuffs, "and ensure no one else knows about these numbers. The railroad is coming, and I won't let anything or anyone stand in my way." Abby remained motionless until long after their footsteps faded. Only when the building fell silent did she allow herself to breathe fully, tears streaming silently down her face. The ledger in her arms, once merely suspicious, now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Evidence of murder. 3 days later, Abigail stood at her desk in the bank, sunlight streaming through tall windows as she methodically entered numbers in the large account book. To anyone observing, she appeared the picture of professional composure. Her dark blonde hair neatly pinned, her posture perfect, her movements precise. No one could see how her heart raced beneath her high-necked blouse or how her eyes constantly darted to Coleman's office door. "Miss Thornton?" Abby startled, nearly knocking over an inkwell. Margaret Hamilton, Coleman's housekeeper, stood before her desk, a basket over her arm. "I'm sorry to frighten you, dear." Margaret's weathered face creased with concern. "Are you feeling well? You look pale." "Just a headache," Abby forced a smile. "Did you need something, Mrs. Hamilton?" Margaret lowered her voice. "Mr. Coleman asked me to bring his lunch to the bank today. He's meeting with those railroad investors again." Abby nodded, the simple movement requiring enormous effort to appear casual. She had known Margaret since arriving in Silver Creek 2 years ago. It was Margaret who had recommended her to Coleman for the bookkeeping position. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" Abby ventured. Margaret's eyes darted around the empty bank lobby. 5 ranchers dead in 6 months, all accidents. All had refused to sell land along the proposed railroad path. She leaned closer. Coleman had papers from each property in his safe within days of their deaths. "How do you know what's in his safe?" Abby whispered. "I clean his study. I see things." Margaret straightened. "Tonight he's hosting another meeting. I could leave the study window unlatched. His safe isn't as secure as he believes." Abby's breath caught. "That would be very dangerous, Mrs. Hamilton." "More dangerous to do nothing," Margaret replied, her voice hardening. "My Thomas worked for the Miller family before they were accidentally caught in that barn fire last week. Good people." As Margaret walked away, Abby unconsciously touched the silver bracelet at her wrist, the only possession she had from her unknown parents. The delicate wildflower engravings caught the light as she twisted it, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. She returned to the ledgers, but her mind was elsewhere. Raised in St. Mary's Orphanage in Boston, Abby had learned bookkeeping from Sister Agnes, who recognized the girl's gift with numbers. God gives each of us talents for a reason, the nun had told her. Yours might save lives someday. Abby never imagined those words would become so literal. The remaining afternoon dragged like a wounded animal. Each time the bank's door opened, Abby flinched, expecting Coleman to look at her with knowing eyes. But he remained secluded in his office with the railroad investors, men in expensive suits from Chicago and New York, who spoke of opportunity and progress, as if these words could erase the cost in human lives. Just before closing, Coleman emerged with his guests, all smiles and handshakes. His gaze swept over Abby without pause, and she forced herself to keep writing, her penmanship unwavering despite her trembling insides. "Excellent work, as always, Miss Thornton," he said as the men passed her desk. "Those balanced books are the foundation of any successful enterprise." "Thank you, Mr. Coleman," she replied, the words tasting like ash. One of the investors, a corpulent man with a gold watch chain stretched across his vest, paused to study her. "You don't often see a woman with such accounting aptitude. Coleman, you found yourself quite the gem." "Indeed I have, Senator Aldrich," Coleman agreed, his tone suddenly colder. "Miss Thornton is irreplaceable." Something in his emphasis sent ice through Abby's veins. Did he suspect? Had she been too obvious in her investigations? As they left, Senator Aldrich cast one last appraising look over his shoulder that made Abby's skin crawl. She remained at her desk long after the others had gone, ostensibly finalizing the day's transactions, but truly gathering her courage for what lay ahead. That night, beneath a moonless sky, Abby slipped through Coleman's garden, her dark cloak blending with the shadows. The unlatched study window opened silently, and she eased herself into the opulent room. Oil paintings of rugged landscapes hung on wood-paneled walls, a stark contrast to the man who collected them. The safe was hidden behind one such painting, a sweeping vista of mountains that swung away on hidden hinges. Abby's fingers, steady despite her fear, worked the combination she'd seen Coleman use when he thought no one was watching. Inside, she found what she sought: land deeds, letters from the railroad company, and most damning of all, a small red leather book. She quickly copied key information into her notebook, then noticed a yellowed envelope tucked at the back. The faded handwriting read, "Thornton Estate, Final Settlement." Her surname. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, finding a letter dated 20 years earlier. "The Thornton child has been relocated to Boston as instructed. St. Mary's Orphanage has been generously compensated for discretion. The Hawthorne silver mine claim now rests solely with you, as agreed. No connection can ever be traced to the incident at Stardust Valley." Abby stared at the paper, her vision blurring. Thornton child, St. Mary's. The pieces began to align in a horrifying pattern. Deeper in the safe, she found a small tin box. Inside lay newspaper clippings yellowed with age. "Tragedy strikes prominent family. Thornton homestead destroyed in blaze. Prominent rancher James Thornton, wife Eleanor, and children perish in suspicious fire. Sole survivor, Thomas Thornton, brother, inherits vast holdings including the legendary Hawthorne silver mine." A family photograph accompanied the article. A stern-faced man with a strong jawline, a beautiful woman with Abby's same high cheekbones, and two children, a boy of perhaps 10 and a baby in the mother's arms. Abby's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Could it be? Was this her family? The dates aligned with her arrival at St. Mary's. The wildflowers on her bracelet. Could they be from this Stardust Valley? A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Abby hastily replaced everything except a page from the red book, which she slipped into her pocket, in the newspaper clipping, which she folded into her bodice. She closed the safe, swung the painting back, and was halfway through the window when the study door opened. Coleman stepped inside, a glass of brandy in hand. Abby held her breath, frozen half in and half out of the window. His gaze swept the room, pausing on the painting that concealed the safe. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would check it. Instead, he sighed heavily, drank his brandy, and left, closing the door behind him. Abby didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until her lungs began to burn. She slipped out into the night, her mind reeling with what she'd discovered. Not just evidence of Coleman's crimes, but a possible link to her own past, to who she really was. The following evening, Abby returned to Coleman's house, needing to speak with Margaret. She found the back door unlocked as arranged, but the kitchen was dark and silent. "Mrs. Hamilton?" she called softly, moving through the shadowy room. A metallic scent hit her first, copper and salt. Then, as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw the crumpled form on the floor. Margaret lay in a pool of blood, her throat slashed, eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. Abby's scream died in her throat as heavy footsteps sounded from the hall. She backed away, bumped into a table, and sent dishes crashing to the floor. Without waiting to see who approached, she fled through the back door and into the night. At her small rented room above the dressmaker's shop, Abby threw essential items into a bag with trembling hands. Clothes, money saved for her dream of opening a bookshop, the copied ledger pages, and the mysterious note about the Thornton child. The silver bracelet remained on her wrist, as always. She had one chance: reach Cheyenne and find Judge Morrison, known for his incorruptibility. Coleman's influence couldn't extend that far. The stable boy barely stirred as she saddled a horse, leaving payment plus extra. By the time the stars began to fade from the pre-dawn sky, Silver Creek was miles behind her, and Abby Thornton, orphan, bookkeeper, and now fugitive, urged her mount forward, the weight of murdered families and her own mysterious past driving her onward. Dawn broke harsh and golden over the eastern plains as Abby pushed her horse to its limits. The animal, a serviceable bay mare from the livery stable, lacked the stamina for prolonged hard riding. By midday, foam flecked its neck, and its breathing had become labored. Abby slowed their pace, scanning the horizon. The vast emptiness of Wyoming territory surrounded her, beautiful and terrifying in its immensity. She had no real experience with wilderness, having grown up in Boston's crowded streets before venturing west 2 years ago, drawn by advertisements for bookkeepers needed in growing frontier towns. A sound caught her attention, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats, multiple horses. Panic surged through her as she turned in the saddle. Far behind but gaining, 5 riders, their forms small against the landscape, but moving with purpose. Coleman's men. Abby urged her exhausted mount forward, searching desperately for somewhere to hide in the open terrain. A shallow ravine appeared ahead, cutting across the prairie like a wound. She guided her horse down its steep bank, following the dry creek bed that wound between scrubby brush and stunted trees. For hours, she navigated the maze of ravines, doubling back and creating false trails where possible. The sun tracked mercilessly overhead, beating down with indifferent cruelty. Her water ran low, then out. The horse stumbled repeatedly, its reserves depleted. Night brought temporary relief from pursuit, but new dangers of its own. Abby made camp in a sheltered alcove, not daring to light a fire. The cold seeped into her bones as she huddled against her saddle, one hand resting on the revolver, the other absently tracing the wildflower pattern on her bracelet. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of burning buildings and a woman's voice calling a name she couldn't quite hear. She woke with tears on her cheeks, unsure if they were for the family she'd never known or for Margaret, whose kindness had cost her life. Dawn of the second day found Abby moving again, her mare barely responsive to commands. By mid-morning, she heard them again. Closer this time. A desperate push across an open meadow ended when her horse stumbled, fell to its knees, and could not rise again. The loyal animal had given everything. Patting its neck one last time, Abby gathered what she could carry and continued on foot, following the tree line of a small creek. The weight of her bag pulled at her shoulders, but she refused to abandon the evidence she'd risked everything to obtain. By afternoon, the sound of pursuit had faded, but a new threat emerged. 3 men, not Coleman's riders but rough-looking drifters, spotted her from a distance. Their shouts carried across the open ground as they altered course to intercept her. Abby ran, her city-bred lungs burning with the effort. A shot rang out, kicking up dirt near her feet. The second bullet found her shoulder, the impact spinning her around but not stopping her headlong flight into a dense copse of trees. Blood soaked her sleeve as she pressed on, the wound a hot brand against her skin. Night fell again, bringing blessed concealment but worsening disorientation. Fever began to take hold, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. The third day dawned with Abby barely conscious, stumbling forward on instinct alone. The infection in her shoulder wound sent tendrils of poison through her body. She walked through a haze of fever dreams, sometimes seeing her murdered parents walking beside her, other times hearing Margaret's voice warning of dangers ahead. In one such vision, an old Native American man appeared on the path, speaking words she couldn't understand before dissolving into mist. Was this death coming for her? Or some ancestral guardian trying to guide her home? As twilight painted the western sky in shades of fire, Abby spotted the rough-hewn structure of a trading post nestled against a stand of cottonwoods. Salvation, if she could reach it. She staggered forward, every sense alert despite her weakness. No horses were visible, except for a magnificent Appaloosa stallion tethered near the porch, its spotted coat gleaming in the fading light, muscles rippling beneath as it pawed the ground impatiently. Abby assessed her options with the clarity of desperation. Without a horse, she would die in this wilderness. Coleman's men weren't far behind. The choice was simple, if terrible. Steal the horse or face certain death. Her hand found the small revolver in her pocket, the one she'd taken from her landlady's drawer before fleeing. She'd never fired a gun before Silver Creek, but the past days had changed that. Moving quietly despite her weakened state, Abby approached the magnificent animal. "Easy," she whispered, reaching for the reins with one hand while holding the gun ready with the other. The horse eyed her warily, ears flicking forward, then back. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, miss." The deep voice froze her in place. Slowly, Abby turned to face the trading post porch, keeping the revolver visible. A tall man leaned against the doorframe, one shoulder casually propping him up. The dying sunlight caught the scar that ran through his left eyebrow and traced his cheekbone, a pale line against sun-darkened skin. His eyes, a startling shade of blue-green, assessed her with unsettling thoroughness. "I need this horse," Abby said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "It's a matter of life and death." "Clearly," he replied, nodding toward her bloodied shoulder. "Though I suspect that horse would throw you before you made it a mile. Storm doesn't take kindly to strangers." "I'll take my chances." Abby tightened her grip on the revolver, ignoring the way the world tilted slightly around her. The man pushed away from the doorframe, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He wore no badge, but the way he carried himself spoke of military training, the same careful awareness she'd seen in soldiers passing through Boston. "Who's after you?" he asked, stepping down from the porch. "No one," Abby lied automatically. His mouth quirked slightly. "That blood on your shirt suggests otherwise." He took another step forward. "Coleman's men?" The name hit her like a physical blow. "How did you—" "The way you flinched just now told me everything I needed to know." He glanced at the horizon, then back at her. "They're close, aren't they?" As if in answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats carried on the evening air. Abby's already racing heart quickened further. "Please," she whispered, the gun wavering in her hand. "They'll kill me." Something shifted in the man's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or decision. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, moving with surprising speed for his size. "Name's Caleb Hawthorne," he said, gently taking the reins from her hand but leaving the gun. "And I have a better idea than you stealing my horse. Ride with me. Storm can carry us both." "Why would you help me?" Suspicion cut through her desperation. "Let's just say Ezra Coleman and I have unfinished business." His eyes hardened momentarily, then softened as they took in her feverish state. "You're about to collapse. Decision time, miss—" "Abby," she offered, swaying slightly. "Abigail Thornton." Something flickered across his face at her surname, there and gone so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. "Well, Miss Thornton, those riders are getting closer. What'll it be?" The hoofbeats grew louder. Abby made her choice. "Lead the way, Mr. Hawthorne." In one fluid motion, Caleb lifted her onto the Appaloosa's back, then swung up behind her. His arm wrapped securely around her waist as he took the reins, his chest a solid wall against her back. "Hold on," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, "and try not to bleed on my saddle." Before she could respond, the horse leapt forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them, as Caleb guided it away from the trading post and into a narrow trail that disappeared into dense woods. The last thing Abby remembered before unconsciousness claimed her was the sensation of being cradled against a stranger's chest and the strangest feeling of safety she'd experienced since childhood. Voices penetrated the darkness of Abby's fevered sleep. Deep male tones intertwined with what sounded like another language entirely, rhythmic and unfamiliar. The wound is infected. These herbs will draw out the poison. The accent was distinct, each word carefully formed. Will she survive? That was Hawthorne's voice, tension evident beneath his controlled tone. If her spirit is strong, the fever must break by morning. Abby forced her eyes open, blinking against the dim light of a small cabin interior. Rough-hewn logs formed the walls, and a fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows. She lay on a narrow bed covered with soft furs and blankets. Standing over her was an elderly Native American man, his copper face deeply lined with age, long silver-streaked black hair pulled back from his forehead. His dark eyes, sharp and alert despite his years, caught her waking movement immediately. "She returns to us," he said, a slight smile softening his severe features. Caleb moved into her field of vision, concern evident in the furrow of his brow. "Welcome back, Miss Thornton. You've been unconscious for 2 days." 2 days? Panic surged through her. "Coleman's men are searching in the wrong direction," Caleb assured her. "Bear made sure of that." "Bear?" she questioned weakly. The older man inclined his head. "Thaddeus Medicine Crow, but most call me Bear." He indicated the poultice on her shoulder. "The fever is still upon you. Rest now." Abby's gaze shifted between the two men, confusion evident. "Where am I?" "Somewhere safe," Caleb replied. "A place Coleman doesn't know exists." Bear handed her a cup of strong-smelling liquid. "Drink. It will help the fever." Abby hesitated only briefly before accepting the tea. As she drank the bitter mixture, her eyes remained on Caleb, who stood with arms crossed, watching her with an intensity that raised questions she was too weak to ask. Why? The single word encompassed everything. Why help her? Why bring her here? Why care if she lived or died? Caleb exchanged a glance with Bear before answering. "Rest first. Questions later." As the herbal tea worked its way through her system, Abby felt darkness closing in again. Before surrendering to it, she caught fragments of whispered conversation. "You didn't tell me she wore the Thornton bracelet," Bear murmured. "Because I didn't know," Caleb responded, his voice tight with some emotion Abby couldn't identify. "It can't be possible. She can't be." The rest faded as sleep reclaimed her, leaving only the haunting sensation that she had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple escape from Coleman's vengeance. In her dreams, Abby stood in a valley filled with wildflowers, the same delicate blooms engraved on her bracelet. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks catching the morning light. A silver stream wound through the valley, glittering like quicksilver in the dawn. A woman stood by the stream, her back to Abby, dark hair falling in waves down her back. When she turned, Abby gasped. The woman's face was her own, but older, wiser, with eyes that had seen both ardour and profound sorrow. "Remember," the woman said, her voice carried on the breeze. "Remember who you are." "I don't know who I am," Abby called back, frustration building. "Tell me." But the woman only smiled sadly, pointing to the bracelet on Abby's wrist. "The answers are there. They've always been there. But beware. Some truths come at a terrible price." The dream shifted, the peaceful valley transforming into a nightmarish scene of flames and smoke. A house was burning, screams echoing from within. A man carried a small child from the inferno, passing her to a shadowy figure on horseback. "Take her far from here," the man gasped, his face blackened with soot. "He must never know she survived." The shadowy figure nodded, cradling the child. As they turned to leave, moonlight caught the rider's profile, and Abby recognized Bear, 20 years younger but unmistakable. "Keep her safe," the burning man pleaded. "Promise me, old friend." "Until my dying breath," Bear vowed, "the last Thornton will live." The fever broke sometime in the night. Abby awoke to sunlight filtering through oiled paper windows, casting a warm glow across the cabin's interior. She felt weak but clear-headed for the first time in days. Carefully sitting up, she took inventory of her surroundings. The cabin was small but meticulously crafted, with a main room containing the hearth, a table with chairs, and the bed where she lay. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the air with earthy scents. Through a doorway, she glimpsed another small room. Her shoulder had been professionally bandaged, and someone had changed her blood-stained clothing for a simple cotton nightgown. Her possessions, the few items she'd brought from Silver Creek, were neatly arranged on a small table beside the bed, including the copied ledger pages and the note about the Thornton child. "You're awake," Abby startled, turning to find Caleb entering through the cabin's front door. Sunlight haloed him briefly before he closed it behind him. "How do you feel?" he asked, crossing to where a kettle hung near the fire. "Better," she admitted. "Thank you for everything." He poured steaming liquid into a cup. "Bear's the one you should thank. His remedies are more effective than any doctor's." "Where is he?" "Checking traps." Caleb brought the cup to her. "Willow bark tea. It will help with the pain." And their fingers brushed as she accepted it, and Abby was suddenly, acutely aware of her state of undress beneath the blankets. A flush that had nothing to do with fever rose to her cheeks. "Your clothes were ruined," Caleb said, reading her discomfort. "Bear found this for you to wear. There are our proper clothes in that chest. They might be large, but they'll serve until yours can be washed." Abby nodded, sipping the tea to avoid his gaze. Now that her mind was clear, she could better assess her rescuer. He moved with the contained grace of a predator, economical, precise. The scar through his eyebrow continued down his cheek, ending just above his jawline. His hair, dark as midnight, was tied back from his face, revealing strong features that might have been handsome were they not set in such a serious expression. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "Really?" Caleb settled into a chair near the bed. "I told you, Caleb Hawthorne." "That's a name, not an answer." Abby set the cup down. "You knew Coleman. You brought me to a hidden cabin with a Lakota healer. You're not just some traveler passing through." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perceptive. I'm a bookkeeper. Noticing details is my job." "Was your job," he corrected. "I doubt Coleman will welcome you back with open arms." The reminder of her situation sobered her. "I need to reach Cheyenne. Judge Morrison must see these ledgers, learn what Coleman has done." "Morrison is a good man," Caleb agreed, "but reaching him won't be as simple as you think. Coleman has men watching all the roads, and he has influence with certain officials." "You still haven't answered my question," Abby persisted. "Who are you?" Caleb studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed. "I was a major in the Union Army during the war, command of a specialized scout unit. Afterward, I worked as a bounty hunter for a time." He paused. "Now I'm here on assignment from the territorial governor, investigating Coleman and his connection to a series of land grabs and suspicious deaths." Abby's eyes widened. "Then my ledgers could be exactly what we need," he finished, "but not until you're stronger. Coleman's men won't find this place. Bear's people have kept it hidden for generations." "How do you know Bear?" Something softened in Caleb's expression. "He saved my life a long time ago, taught me how to survive when I had nothing left." Before Abby could inquire further, the door opened, and Bear entered, carrying several rabbits strung on a line. His eyes immediately found Abby's. "The fever has broken." "Good." He handed the rabbits to Caleb and approached the bed, placing a weathered hand on Abby's forehead. "Still warm, but the sickness is leaving. The spirits have favored you." "Thank you for healing me," Abby said sincerely. Bear's gaze dropped to her wrist, where the silver bracelet gleamed. "That is old silver work. Family treasure?" "The only thing I have from my parents," Abby replied, instinctively touching the delicate band. "I was left at an orphanage in Boston as an infant, with just this." Bear's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes as he exchanged a look with Caleb. "The wildflowers engraved there, they grow in only one place in these territories." "Where?" Abby asked eagerly. "A valley called Stardust by the settlers. My people have another name for it." Bear's voice took on a storyteller's cadence. "It is said that when the morning sun strikes the valley after rain, the flowers shine like fallen stars on the grass." Stardust Valley, the same place mentioned in the letter about the Thornton child. Abby's heart quickened. "I need to go there," she said, the words coming unbidden. "Perhaps someday," Bear replied cryptically. "When the time is right, first you must heal. Then we will see what path the spirits have laid for you." As Bear moved away to help Caleb prepare the rabbits, Abby leaned back against the pillows, mind racing. Whatever mysterious connection existed between her bracelet, her name, and this remote Wyoming valley, she sensed that Caleb and Bear knew more than they were saying. For now, she would recover her strength. But soon, very soon, she would demand the full truth about Coleman, about this hidden cabin, and most importantly, about herself. For 3 days, Abby regained her strength in the small cabin. Under Bear's care, the infection retreated, and color returned to her cheeks. Each morning she would sit on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun illuminate the forest surrounding their hidden sanctuary. Each afternoon she studied her copied ledger pages, searching for patterns and connections. And each evening, she would press Caleb and Bear for more information about Coleman, about the Thorntons, about her bracelet. They answered some questions but deflected others with practiced ease. On the fourth morning, Abby woke before dawn. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, men's trousers rolled at the ankles and a worn flannel shirt that hung loosely on her slender frame, and stepped outside to watch the sunrise. A light mist clung to the ground, transforming the forest into something ethereal. The sound of metal against stone drew her attention to where Caleb sat on a stump, sharpening a hunting knife with methodical precision. Each stroke of the whetstone was measured, deliberate. "You're up early," he remarked without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," Abby replied, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. Caleb nodded as if he understood perfectly. Perhaps he did. She'd heard him pacing at night, caught glimpses of the haunted expression that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. "Nightmares?" he asked quietly. "Memories, I think. Or maybe just wishful thinking." She approached, settling on another stump across from him. "I keep dreaming of a valley filled with wildflowers, and a woman who looks like me but isn't." Caleb's hand paused momentarily on the stone before resuming its rhythm. "Dreams can be complicated." "So can the truth," Abby countered, "which you and Bear seem determined to keep from me." The knife stilled completely. Caleb looked up, his blue-green eyes meeting hers directly for the first time in days. Something powerful and unnamed passed between them, a current that made Abby's breath catch. "Not keep from you, Katine," he said finally. "Protect you from." "I don't need protection from the truth. I need answers." Abby leaned forward. "Who were the Thorntons? Why did Coleman have papers about them? What's the connection to my bracelet, to Stardust Valley? And why do you and Bear exchange those looks whenever I ask about any of it?" Caleb set the knife and stone aside, running a hand over his face. The gesture revealed a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Some stories aren't mine to tell," he said. "Bear has been waiting for the right moment. And when will that be, May? When you're strong enough to handle what comes after." Before Abby could respond, Bear emerged from the cabin, carrying 3 steaming cups. "Tea is ready. The day begins with many questions, I see." "Questions that deserve answers," Abby replied, accepting a cup from him. Bear's weathered face revealed nothing as he handed the second cup to Caleb and kept the third for himself. "Yes, but first you must understand what you face now in the present. The past will come when it is time." Frustration burned in Abby's chest, but she recognized the stubborn set of Bear's jaw. He would not be pushed. "Fine," she conceded. "Then tell me about Coleman, about what he's doing now." Bear nodded approvingly. "This we can discuss. Ezra Coleman is not merely a banker and businessman. He is part of a network that stretches from Wyoming to Washington." "The railroad," Abby supplied. "More than that," Caleb interjected. "Coleman and his associates, Senator Aldrich among them, are using the coming of the railroad to acquire land with valuable resources, not just for right-of-way, but for what lies beneath." "Like the silver mine mentioned in that letter," Abby said. Bear and Caleb exchanged another of those looks that infuriated her. "Among other things," Caleb confirmed. "Coal, copper, silver. Wyoming is rich with resources that will fuel the next century. Coleman knows this. He's acquiring land through any means necessary, foreclosures, intimidation, and when those fail, murder," Abby finished. "The ledgers prove it. He's been withdrawing funds from accounts of the deceased, funneling them through shell companies, then using that money to buy up neighboring properties. It's all there in the numbers, if you know how to read them. Which is why he wants you dead," Bear stated matter-of-factly. "You can read what others cannot." A chill ran through Abby despite the warm tea. The Millers weren't his first victims, were they? No, Caleb said quietly. Coleman has been eliminating obstacles for decades. The Millers were just the latest. The implication hung in the air between them. Not the first, decades. Abby felt the pieces trying to align in her mind, but crucial connections were still missing. I need to get these ledgers to Judge Morrison in Cheyenne, she said, redirecting the conversation to immediate concerns. Coleman must be stopped. Agreed, Caleb nodded. But we need more than your ledgers. We need to find Mrs. Miller, if she's still alive. Her husband said she had pages from a red ledger. The red book I saw in Coleman's safe, Abby realized. I only managed to copy one page before I heard him coming. That book contains locations of mineral deposits throughout the territory, Bear explained. Many discovered by my people and shared with early settlers who came in peace. Like the Thorntons? Abby couldn't resist asking. Bear's expression softened slightly. Yes, like the Thorntons. A moment of silence settled over them, broken only by birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. You should begin training today, Bear announced, suddenly standing. If you are to survive what lies ahead, you must learn to defend yourself properly. Abby blinked in surprise. Training? Caleb's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Bear believes everyone should know three things: how to heal, how to hunt, and how to fight. You've learned two already, Bear said. Time for the third. The clearing behind the cabin became Abby's training ground. Despite her still healing shoulder, Bear insisted she begin immediately. Caleb watched from the porch as the old man taught her how to stand, how to move, how to fall without injury. Your body remembers what your mind does not, Bear told her as she picked herself up from the dirt for the fifth time. Trust its wisdom. My body is telling me this is madness, Abby muttered, brushing off her borrowed trousers. No, Bear contradicted calmly. Your thoughts say that. Your body is learning. By midday, sweat soaked through her shirt, and her muscles trembled with exertion. When Bear finally called a halt, Abby collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. Not bad, Caleb commented, approaching with a canteen of water. Most people vomit on their first day of Bear's training. The day is young, Abby replied dryly, accepting the water with gratitude. A ghost of a smile crossed Caleb's face, the closest thing to genuine amusement she'd seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard angles and making him look younger, less burdened. Just as quickly, it vanished. Rest now, he said. After lunch, it's my turn. Your turn for what? To teach you to shoot. Properly this time. Abby groaned. Is this really necessary? Coleman won't stop hunting you, Caleb said, his voice hardening, and we can't always be there to protect you. The stark reality of her situation silenced any further protests. Abby nodded, pushing herself to her feet with effort. Then I'd better be a good student. Caleb proved to be a demanding but patient instructor. He positioned himself behind Abby, adjusting her stance, her grip on the revolver, the angle of her arms. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger, he instructed, his voice close to her ear. Never jerk it. His proximity was distracting. The solid warmth of him at her back, the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to his skin. Abby forced herself to focus on the target, a series of tin cans arranged on a distant log. Her first shots went wild. The third grazed a can, sending it spinning. By the 10th attempt, she was hitting more than missing. Good, Caleb approved. Again. They practiced until the light began to fade, by which time Abby's arms ached almost as much as her legs from Bear's earlier lesson. Still, a sense of accomplishment warmed her as they walked back to the cabin. Where did you learn to shoot? She asked Caleb. My father taught me the basics when I was a boy, he replied. The Army refined those skills. War made them necessary. The war changed everything, didn't it? Abby observed quietly. Caleb's expression darkened. War reveals what's already there, courage or cowardice, compassion or cruelty. It doesn't change men, it unmasks them. Is that what happened to you? You were unmasked? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on some distant point. I learned what I was capable of, he finally said. Both the good and the terrible. They had reached the cabin. Bear stood on the porch watching their approach with keen eyes that seemed to see more than just their physical forms. Tonight, he announced, We will share stories by the fire. It is time. Caleb tensed beside Abby. Are you certain? Bear nodded solemnly. The spirits have spoken. She is ready to hear what must be told. After a simple dinner of rabbit stew, Bear added wood to the hearth until the fire blazed bright. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of night sounds. Owl calls, distant wolf howls, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Bear settled cross-legged on a woven mat before the fire, gesturing for Abby to sit opposite him. Caleb remained standing, leaning against the wall, his face half in shadow. All stories begin somewhere, Bear intoned, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a practiced storyteller. This one begins 25 summers ago, when a young settler named James Thornton came to this land with his bride. Abby's heart quickened at the name. She leaned forward, entranced. James was different from other white men. He listened to the wisdom of the people. He learned our way of finding water, of reading the land. He treated all with respect. Bear's hands moved as he spoke, painting pictures in the firelight. My tribe, the Lakota, showed him a hidden valley where silver ran beneath the earth like frozen rivers. In gratitude, James swore that the land would never be desecrated, that the silver would be taken with reverence, leaving the sacred places untouched. Bear's eyes reflected the dancing flames. The Thorntons prospered. They built a home in the valley, where wildflowers covered the earth each spring. When their first son was born, James came to our village with gifts, asking me to bless the child in our way, alongside their own traditions. Abby glanced at Caleb, whose face had become a rigid mask, every muscle tense. Years passed, Bear continued. The Thornton boy grew strong. A daughter was born. The silver mine provided wealth, which James shared generously with those in need. But success breeds jealousy, and James had an enemy in his own family, his younger brother Thomas. Coleman, Abby whispered, the connection suddenly clear. Ezra Coleman is Thomas Thornton. Bear nodded gravely. Thomas envied his brother's success, his happiness. He wanted the silver mine for himself, but James held the only complete map to its riches, the Red Book. Thomas made an alliance with powerful men from the East, promising them wealth if they would help him gain control of the mine. Bear paused, taking a drink of water before continuing. One night, fire claimed the Thornton home. Your parents did not survive. And I was saved? Abby asked me quietly. Bear nodded. A loyal ranch hand pulled you from the nursery. I took you east, beyond Thomas's reach, leaving only your mother's bracelet as a connection to your heritage. Abby's hand moved unconsciously to her bracelet, the silver cool against her suddenly feverish skin. A bracelet, she whispered, touching the silver band at her wrist. Bear nodded slowly. Your mother's. The valley's first silver, crafted by your father's hands. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Abby felt dizzy, the world tilting beneath her as everything she thought she knew about herself shifted, realigned. You're saying that I'm the Thornton daughter? She finally managed, her voice barely audible. Yes, Bear confirmed gently. You are Abigail Eleanor Thornton, daughter of James and Eleanor, born in Stardust Valley 23 summers ago. Abby turned to look at Caleb, who had not moved, had not spoken. His face was a study in controlled anguish, eyes fixed on the floor. And what aren't you telling me? She asked, an inexplicable certainty growing within her. Oh, I'll see. What else is there? It was Bear who answered, his voice solemn in the firelit cabin. The son who died in the fire, the firstborn Thornton child. He paused, eyes moving to Caleb. His name was Caleb James Thornton. The world seemed to stop. Abby stared at Caleb, at her brother, as understanding crashed over her like a wave. But you didn't die, she whispered. Slowly, Caleb raised his head. In the firelight, she could see the family resemblance that had been invisible before. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn set of the jaw. No, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't die. Bear found me in the woods near the burning house. I'd escaped through a window, but I was badly burned, unconscious. Thomas, Coleman, believed all the Thorntons were dead. To keep me safe, Bear gave me a new name, a new identity. Hawthorne, Abby realized, from the silver mine. Caleb nodded. By the time I recovered enough to understand what had happened, you were already gone, taken to Boston, beyond my reach. I was 10 years old, angry, determined to reclaim what was ours someday. But why didn't you look for me? Why didn't you come for me? The questions burst from Abby, sharp with sudden hurt. Pain flashed across Caleb's face. When I was 16, Bear and I traveled to Boston. The orphanage claimed you'd been adopted by a family named Reeves who'd left no forwarding address. But I was never adopted, Abby said, frowning. I remained at St. Mary's until I was 18. Caleb's expression darkened. Coleman, his influence must have reached even there. So you gave up? Abby challenged, looking back to Caleb. Never. The single word vibrated with intensity. I joined the army, gained skills, made connections. After the war, I used those connections to continue searching while working as a bounty hunter. 2 years ago, I learned that Coleman, Thomas, had established himself in Wyoming territory under his new name. I came west, determined to bring him to justice. And find me? Caleb's expression softened. I never stopped looking for my sister. But I had no idea you were here in Wyoming, working for the very man who destroyed our family. The irony wasn't lost on Abby. When Sister Agnes had shown her the advertisement for a bookkeeper position in Wyoming territory, something had drawn her to it like a compass needle to north. The nun had even remarked on her unusual determination to travel so far west. Now she understood. Some part of her had been seeking her roots all along, guiding her back to the land of her birth, and inadvertently to the very man who had destroyed her family. Coleman doesn't know who you are, Bear said quickly, reading her expression. He has never seen you as an adult, and he believes all Thorntons died that night. Until now, Abby realized, the ledgers, the evidence I took, he'll be searching everywhere for me. Yes, Caleb confirmed, and when he discovers your name, it's why we kept the truth from you at first. Bear explained, knowledge brings danger. You needed time to heal, to prepare. Abby rose to her feet, overwhelmed by revelations and implications. She paced the small confines of the cabin, mind racing. All my life, I wondered who I was, where I came from, she said, more to herself than to them. I created so many stories in my mind, that my parents were aristocrats who couldn't keep me, that they died heroically, that someday they would find me and explain everything. She stopped, facing Caleb. I never imagined I had a brother, that my family was murdered, that the murderer has been hunting me without even knowing it. Caleb stood, approaching her carefully as one might a frightened animal. I wanted to tell you the moment I saw the bracelet, but we needed to be certain, and you needed strength to face what comes next. What does come next? Abby asked, suddenly exhausted by the weight of truth. Justice, Caleb replied, the word carrying all the determination of a vow. For our parents, for the Millers, for all of Coleman's victims. And after justice? The question slipped out before Abby could consider it. Something softened in Caleb's expression. Hope, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of it. After justice, we reclaim what's ours. Stardust Valley, the Hawthorne Mine, our legacy. Home, Bear added quietly. You both return home. Home. The word resonated within Abby like a bell, stirring memories she hadn't known she possessed. The scent of wildflowers, a woman's gentle laughter, the feel of strong arms lifting her toward the sun. I want to see it, she said suddenly. Stardust Valley, where we were born. You will, Caleb promised, when this is over. No, Abby's voice strengthened with resolve. Before we confront Coleman, before we risk everything, I need to see what we're fighting for. Bear's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Your mother's spirit burns in you, little one. She too would demand to see with her own eyes. Caleb hesitated, clearly torn. It's dangerous. Coleman has men searching everywhere. Coleman is looking for a bookkeeper from Boston, Abby countered, not a Thornton returning home. Besides, you said yourself that Stardust Valley is hidden, protected. It is, Bear confirmed. Few remember its location now. After a long moment, Caleb nodded. Decision made. We'll leave at dawn. It's a 2-day ride. Relief and anticipation flooded through Abby. She would see her birthplace, the valley of wildflowers that had haunted her dreams. Whatever dangers lay ahead, this felt necessary, a pilgrimage to find the missing pieces of herself. Thank you, she said, looking between Bear and Caleb, her brother, with new understanding. Bear rose with the fluid grace that belied his years. Tonight, sleep. Tomorrow, journey. The spirits will watch over the children of Stardust Valley. That night, sleep eluded Abby. She lay awake, mind whirling with revelations and questions. Around midnight, she gave up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and stepping quietly onto the porch. The night sky stretched above her, a vast canvas of stars more brilliant than she had ever seen in Boston or Silver Creek. Somewhere among those stars, she imagined her parents watching over her and Caleb, waiting for justice, for reunion. Can't sleep? The quiet voice startled her. Caleb sat in the shadows at the far end of the porch, a familiar position. Too much to process, Abby admitted, moving to join him. Every time I close my eyes, I see faces I can't quite remember. I know the feeling. Caleb shifted, making room on the bench beside him. For years after the fire, I would wake up screaming, certain I could save them if I just tried harder. Abby settled beside him, pulling the blanket tighter. Do you remember them clearly, our parents? Caleb was silent for a long moment. Father was tall, with eyes like yours. He laughed often, sang terribly, and could name every star in the sky. Mother was quieter but fierce when needed. She grew the most beautiful gardens and taught me to read before I was 5. Each detail was a precious gift, a thread connecting Abby to a past she couldn't recall. And me, do you remember me as a baby? A soft chuckle escaped him, the first Abby had heard. You were loud, determined. You would crawl after me everywhere no matter how many times I tried to escape my baby sister. Some things never change, Abby observed wryly. I'm still chasing after you. The shared moment of humor faded into comfortable silence. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens. I used to imagine finding you, Caleb said eventually, his voice low. I created 1,000 scenarios in my mind, but I never pictured this, you saving yourself, gathering evidence against Coleman, nearly dying to bring him to justice. I didn't know what I was doing, Abby confessed. I just knew the numbers didn't add up, that people were dying, that something was wrong. Thornton instincts, Caleb said. Father always said our family had a sixth sense for injustice. Another silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken emotions. I'm sorry, Caleb said finally, the words seeming to cost him, for not finding you sooner, for not protecting you from all of this. Abby turned to study his profile in the starlight. The scar that marred his face suddenly made her wonder what other scars he carried. The invisible ones, the ones that had shaped the solemn man beside her. You were a child yourself, she said gently. You survived. You never stopped searching. And when fate finally brought us together, you saved my life without even knowing who I was. Bear would say it wasn't fate, but the spirits guiding us home. Perhaps he's right. Abby hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since the revelation. Do you think Coleman, Thomas, will recognize you? It's been 20 years. Caleb touched the scar unconsciously. This helps with disguise, and he believes I died in the fire. People see what they expect to see. Is that why you became a bounty hunter? To learn how to hide in plain sight? Partly, Caleb's voice hardened. Mostly I wanted to learn how to track men who don't want to be found, how to bring them to justice, or deliver it myself. The cold determination in his voice sent a shiver through Abby. What will you do when we find Coleman? When we have proof of his crimes? Caleb turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting starlight. What do you want me to do, Abigail? The use of her full name, her true name, gave her pause. No one had ever asked what she wanted, what justice she sought. I want him to face trial, she said slowly. I want the world to know what he did, not just to our family, but to all his victims. I want to reclaim our legacy legally, properly, so he can never take it from us again. And if the law fails, if his connections protect him? The question hung between them, charged with the weight of 20 years of loss. Then we'll do what we must, Abby answered, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. But justice first, vengeance only if necessary. Caleb studied her for a long moment before nodding. You truly are James Thornton's daughter. From inside the cabin, Bear's voice called softly. The night grows cold. Come inside, children of Stardust. Tomorrow's journey requires rest. As they rose to return to the warmth of the cabin, Abby impulsively reached out to touch Caleb's arm. Thank you for waiting for me all these years, for not giving up. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a softening, a glimpse of the boy he must have been before fire and loss forged him into this harder man. You're my sister, he said simply, the only family I have left. I would have waited forever. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold as they prepared to depart. Bear had packed provisions, medicines, and weapons with the efficiency of one accustomed to wilderness travel. 3 horses waited, Storm for Caleb, a dappled mare for Abby, and a sturdy brown gelding for Bear. Remember what I taught you, Bear instructed as he helped Abby adjust her stirrups. The horse knows when you are afraid. Breathe with her, move with her, become one spirit. Abby nodded, patting the mare's neck. The animal seemed gentle enough, nothing like the high-spirited Storm, who tossed his head impatiently as Caleb secured their packs. We'll follow game trails most of the way, Caleb explained. Slower but safer. Coleman's men will be watching the main routes to Cheyenne. What if they find the cabin while we're gone, Abby worried. Bear's weathered face creased in a rare smile. They will not find what the forest wishes to hide. With final adjustments made, they mounted and set off into the misty morning. Bear led the way, followed by Abby, with Caleb bringing up the rear. They rode in silence, alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. The terrain gradually changed as they traveled, forest giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub and occasional stands of aspen. By midday, they had covered significant ground, stopping briefly by a stream to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of dried meat and hard bread. How much further? Abby asked, stretching her legs. Despite her injuries and the days of relative inactivity, she felt stronger than expected, her body remembering skills she hadn't known she possessed. We'll reach the foothills by nightfall, Caleb replied, studying the horizon. Tomorrow we cross the high country and descend into the valley from the north. Coleman knows nothing of this route, Bear added. It is known only to my people and those we trusted. Like our father, Abby said quietly. Bear nodded, his dark eyes softening with memory. James was a brother to me in all but blood. When my wife and son were taken by the fever, he sat with me through the dark moontime, never leaving, never speaking unless I needed words. This glimpse into her father's character, his compassion, his respect for Bear's customs, was precious to Abby. She stored it away like a treasure, another piece of the puzzle that was her history. They continued their journey through the afternoon, climbing steadily into higher country. The air grew cooler, tinged with the scent of pine and sage. Occasionally, Bear would point out plants with medicinal properties or signs of wildlife, teaching as they traveled. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow near a small spring. Caleb built a fire while Bear prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew with wild onions. Abby tended the horses, grateful for the quiet task that allowed her to process the day's thoughts. You ride well, Caleb observed, approaching to help unsaddle her mare, as if you've done it all your life. It feels natural, Abby admitted, more than it should given my upbringing in Boston. The body remembers what the mind forgets, Bear called from the fire, echoing his earlier teaching. You rode before you could walk. Eleanor would place you before her on the saddle, singing as you traveled through the valley. The image brought unexpected tears to Abby's eyes. She busied herself with brushing the mare, hiding her emotion. After dinner, they sat around the fire as stars appeared overhead. Bear brewed a tea of special herbs, passing cups to both siblings. For dreamless sleep, he explained. Tomorrow we enter sacred lands. Abby sipped the bitter liquid, watching the flames dance. Did you ever return to Stardust Valley after the fire? Bear nodded solemnly. Many times, to tend the graves, to keep watch, to ensure the land remained untouched. Coleman, Thomas, searched for the valley for years, but without the red book, he could not find it. The mountains guard their secrets well. What about the silver mine? Caleb asked. Did Coleman ever locate it? He found a small, secondary vein, Bear replied. Enough to build his fortune, but not the main lode. Your father was wise. He kept the true map in the red book, sharing it only with those he trusted completely. Like Mr. Miller, Abby realized. That's why Coleman killed him. He'd somehow discovered Miller had pages from the book. Yes, Bear confirmed. The spirits led Miller to fragments of truth. Had he lived, he might have found the valley himself. The implications settled over them like the gathering night. Coleman's decades-long quest for the Thornton legacy had left a trail of bodies, their parents only the first victims of his greed. "We should rest," Caleb said finally, banking the fire for the night. "Tomorrow will test us all." As Abby settled into her bedroll beneath the vast Wyoming sky, Bear's tea working its calming magic, she felt a strange peace descending. Tomorrow she would see her birthplace, the land of her ancestors. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she was no longer facing them alone. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of family, not the idealized version she had imagined throughout her childhood, but the real imperfect one she had found. A scarred, haunted brother, a wise, stoic Lakota elder who had saved them both, and the memories of parents whose love had set this entire story in motion 20 years before. They rose before dawn, breaking camp efficiently in the gray half-light. The day promised to be clear and warm, the sky already shifting from indigo to pale blue as they mounted up and continued their journey. The terrain grew more challenging, steep inclines, narrow passes between towering rock formations, streams that had to be forded carefully. Bear led them with unerring confidence through landscapes that seemed to have no path at all. By mid-morning they had crested a high ridge. Bear reined in his horse, waiting for the siblings to join him. "Look," he said simply, gesturing toward the horizon. Abby gasped as she took in the view. Before them stretched a vast panorama of mountains and valleys, painted in shades of green and gold and purple. Far below, nestled between protective peaks, lay a valley unlike any she had seen before. A perfect oval of verdant land bisected by a silver ribbon of water. "Stardust Valley," Bear said softly. "Your birthplace." Emotion welled up in Abby's throat as she stared at the distant valley. Even from this height, she could see patches of color dotting the green, wildflowers carpeting the earth. The same flowers engraved on her bracelet. The same flowers from her dreams. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Beside her, Caleb sat rigidly in his saddle, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "It hasn't changed," he said, voice rough. "It's exactly as I remember." Bear pointed to a spot near the stream. There stood the Thornton home. And there, by animation, indicated a wooded area to the north, the entrance to the mine. Abby strained her eyes, trying to see details at this distance. "Are there any structures left?" "The house was rebuilt, partially," Caleb answered. "I did it myself over the years. Nothing fancy, just a cabin where I could stay when visiting." The revelation surprised her. "You've been back before." "Every year on the anniversary," he confirmed. "To remember, to renew my promise." The three sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in private thoughts. Finally, Bear gestured forward. "We should continue. We can reach the valley floor by midday." They began the descent, following a switchback trail that hugged the mountainside. The path was narrow, forcing them to ride single file, alert for loose stones or sudden drops. Gradually, the terrain softened, pine forest replacing bare rock. As they neared the valley floor, Bear raised his hand in a signal to halt. His head tilted, listening intently. Caleb immediately drew his rifle from its saddle holster, scanning their surroundings. "What is it?" Abby whispered, tension coiling in her stomach. "Horses," Bear replied quietly. "At least 3, coming from the south." "Coleman's men?" Abby's hand moved to the revolver at her hip, a gesture that had become instinctive during her days of training. "Possibly," Caleb said grimly, "or trappers, or other travelers, but we can't take chances." Bear pointed to a dense thicket of aspens. "There, we can observe unseen." They guided their mounts into the cover of the trees, dismounting to reduce their profile. Caleb positioned himself at the edge of the thicket, rifle ready, while Bear secured the horses to prevent any nickering that might give away their position. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, listening to the approaching riders. Finally, 3 men came into view on the trail below, rough-looking individuals armed with rifles and revolvers. Their horses were lathered, suggesting hard riding. "Not Coleman's regular men," Caleb murmured. "Hired guns, maybe." "How would they know to look here?" Abby whispered. Bear's expression darkened. "Someone may have talked. There are few alive who know of this valley, but secrets can be bought." The riders paused at a fork in the trail, conferring among themselves. Their voices carried faintly on the still air. Burke said the girl might head this way, one man said. Something about family property. Waste of time, another complained. Coleman's offering 500 for her, dead or alive. We should be checking the routes to Cheyenne. Burke's orders were clear, the third insisted. We search the valley, then head east. The others are covering Cheyenne. They continued down the trail, disappearing into the trees that bordered the valley. Rowan Burke, Caleb muttered. Coleman's favorite bounty hunter. If he's involved, the search has intensified. They know about the valley, Abby said, fear and anger mingling in her voice. How? Not the exact location, Bear observed. They searched blindly. But yes, someone has spoken of the Thornton land. We need to move quickly, Caleb decided. Get to the cabin, gather what we need, and leave before they complete their sweep of the valley. And go where? Abby asked. Cheyenne, Caleb replied. It's time to take the fight to Coleman. They waited until the riders had disappeared beyond the tree line before continuing their descent into Stardust Valley. Moving with heightened caution, they followed a narrow deer trail that wound through dense underbrush, effectively concealing their passage. We'll approach the cabin from the north, Caleb whispered as they reached the valley floor. It's better protected, harder to spot. Abby nodded, her senses alert to every sound, every movement in the surrounding forest. The beauty of the valley, which had so captivated her from the ridge, was now secondary to the danger lurking within it. Bear led them along the banks of a clear stream, its water glinting silver in the midday sun. Fish darted beneath the surface, undisturbed by the human presence above. After nearly an hour of careful travel, he raised his hand, signaling a stop. Listen, he instructed softly. Abby held her breath, straining to hear whatever had caught Bear's attention. At first, there was only the gentle burble of the stream, the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. Then she heard it. Voices, distant but distinct, coming from somewhere ahead. The cabin? Oh, she whispered. Caleb nodded grimly. They found it. We need to see how many, Bear said, dismounting. Wait here with the horses. Before Abby could protest, both men had melted into the forest, moving with a silence that spoke of years of practice. Left alone with the three horses, she stroked her mare's neck nervously, eyes scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of danger. The minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour. Finally, the subtle movement of branches announced Bear's return. Caleb followed moments later, his expression dark. 4 men, he reported in a low voice. 2 at the cabin, 2 searching the perimeter, all armed. Burke? Abby asked. Not among them, Bear answered. These are hired guns, not trackers. Caleb quickly outlined their options. We could avoid them completely, circle around and head straight for Cheyenne. Or we could eliminate the threat, secure the cabin, and rest before continuing. What's in the cabin that we need? Abby questioned. Supplies, Caleb replied. Weapons, and Father's journal. I hid it beneath a floorboard years ago. The mention of their father's journal settled the matter for Abby. Another piece of her past, another connection to her origins, waited in that cabin. We need what's in the cabin, she decided, and we need to make sure these men can't report back to Coleman. Something like approval flashed in Caleb's eyes at her decisiveness. We'll need a distraction, he said. Draw at least 2 of them away. Bear nodded thoughtfully. The horses, a stampede would pull their attention south. Can you manage it? Caleb asked the older man. Bear's weathered face creased in a rare smile. I have been creating diversions since before you were born, young Thornton. They quickly formulated a plan. Bear would take the horses south, creating the impression of multiple riders fleeing the area. Once the hired guns gave chase, Caleb and Abby would approach the cabin from opposite directions, neutralizing the remaining threat. Remember your training, Caleb told Abby, checking her revolver. Shoot only if you have no choice. Stealth is our advantage. Abby nodded, fighting to control the flutter of fear in her stomach. 3 days of training hardly prepared her for this, but determination steeled her resolve. These men stood between her and her birthright, between her family and justice. I'm ready, she assured him, hoping her voice conveyed more confidence than she felt. Bear mounted his horse, taking the reins of the other 2 animals. When you hear the thunder of hooves, move quickly. I will circle back and meet you at the lightning pine north of the cabin. With a last nod to both siblings, he disappeared into the trees, leading the horses away. The lightning pine? Abby questioned once they were alone. A massive pine struck by lightning decades ago, Caleb explained, checking his rifle. Half burned but still living. You'll recognize it. They crept closer to the cabin, using the thick forest as cover. From their new position, Abby could just make out the structure. A simple log building nestled against the hillside, smoke rising lazily from its stone chimney. The sight stirred something deep within her, a sense of déjà vu so powerful it momentarily took her breath away. "I've been here before," she whispered, more to herself than to Caleb. "You lived here for the first year of your life," he replied quietly. "The body remembers." Before she could process this, a commotion erupted from the south. The thunder of hooves, shouts of alarm, and the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the valley. "Bear's distraction," Caleb said. "Get ready." As expected, two of the men at the cabin leapt onto their horses, racing toward the sound. The remaining two were more cautious. One positioned himself at the cabin's entrance, while the other circled toward the back. "I'll take the one at the front," Caleb whispered. "You circle around to the rear. Watch for my signal." Abby nodded, slipping into the underbrush as Caleb had taught her. She moved carefully, placing each foot deliberately to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. The man patrolling the rear of the cabin was visible now, a burly figure with a shotgun held loosely in his hands. His attention divided between watching the forest and glancing toward the direction his companions had gone. Creeping closer, Abby positioned herself behind a large oak. She could hear Caleb moving into position on the other side of the clearing. The plan was simple. Caleb would create a distraction, drawing the attention of both men, while Abby approached from behind. A bird call, 3 short whistles, signaled Caleb was ready. Moments later, a branch cracked loudly to her left. The guard at the rear instantly turned toward the sound, raising a shotgun. "Who's there?" he called, his voice betraying nervousness beneath its gruff exterior. Another sound, a rock skittering across the ground, pulled him further from the cabin. Abby seized the moment, darting from her hiding place to the corner of the building. Pressing herself against the rough logs, she edged toward the rear door. A sudden shout from the front of the cabin told her Caleb had made his move. The guard at the rear spun around, momentarily confused about which direction to focus on. That moment of indecision was all Abby needed. She covered the remaining distance in 3 quick strides, raising the heavy rock she'd picked up earlier. The guard turned just as she swung, her aim true to Bear's training. The rock connected with his temple with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Heart pounding, Abby quickly secured his weapons, the shotgun and a revolver tucked in his belt. From the front of the cabin came the sounds of a brief struggle, followed by silence. Moments later, Caleb appeared around the corner, a thin line of blood trickling from a cut on his cheek, but otherwise unharmed. "Front is clear," he reported, eyeing the unconscious man at her feet. "Good work." "He's alive," Abby said, somewhat surprised by her own efficiency. "Should we—" "Tie them up," Caleb finished. "Bear will decide what to do with them when he returns." Together, they secured both men with rope found in the cabin, gagging them to prevent any calls for help. Inside, the cabin was sparse but neat, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed against one wall. Despite its simplicity, it radiated a strange sense of home to Abby. Caleb went directly to a spot near the hearth, prying up a floorboard to reveal a small metal box. Opening it, he removed an aged leather journal, its pages yellowed with time. "Father's journal," he said, handling it with reverence. "Everything is here. His thoughts, his discoveries, maps of the mind workings, even sketches of us as children." Abby approached slowly, almost afraid to touch this direct link to her past. When Caleb handed her the journal, she cradled it gently, opening to a random page. A sketch filled the right side, a woman sitting in a rocking chair, an infant in her arms. The artist had captured such love in the woman's expression that Abby felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mother," she whispered. "And that's—" "You," Caleb confirmed, his voice softened by the memory. "He drew us constantly, said he wanted to preserve every moment." As Abby turned the pages, a separate sheet of paper fell out, older, more worn, with faded ink. She unfolded it carefully, revealing an intricate map. "Is this—" "The mine," Caleb said, taking the map with obvious surprise. "I didn't know he'd hidden it here." This is one of the pages from the Red Book, showing the main entrance and the first level of tunnels. The page Miller's wife took, Abby guessed. Caleb shook his head. Different section. This is just a small part of the complete map, but valuable nonetheless. A sudden owl call from outside, too precisely timed to be natural, alerted them to Bear's return. Caleb immediately moved to the window, verifying it was indeed their companion before opening the door. Bear entered, assessing the bound men with a quick glance. "The others are searching the South Ridge," he reported. "They will not return quickly." "We found part of the mind map," Caleb told him, showing the faded document. Bear studied it briefly, nodding in recognition. "The entrance tunnels. James showed me these many years ago." "What do we do now?" Abby asked, still holding her father's journal. "Gather what we need and leave," Caleb said decisively. "These men will be missed. More will come." "And them?" Abby nodded toward the captives, one of whom was beginning to stir. Bear's expression hardened. "They came to kill. By the laws of my people, their lives are forfeit." "No," Abby said firmly. "We're not murderers. We're not Coleman." A tense silence filled the cabin. Finally, Caleb nodded. "We'll leave them bound. By the time they're found or free themselves, we'll be far from here." Relief flooded through Abby. Despite everything Coleman had taken from her, she wasn't prepared to become like him, taking lives in cold blood. They worked quickly, gathering supplies, weapons, and ammunition. Caleb located a saddlebag full of documents hidden beneath the bed. Land deeds, birth records, and letters that established the Thornton claim to the valley and mine. "Legal proof," he explained, securing the papers carefully, "in case Coleman tries to challenge our identities." As they prepared to leave, Abby paused by the cabin door, looking back at the simple room that represented so much of her lost history. "I wish we had more time here," she said softly. "We will," Caleb promised. "When this is over, we'll return. Rebuild properly." Bear, who had been examining their captives' weapons, suddenly tensed. "Listen," he commanded. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound of approaching riders, more than two, moving quickly. "The others are returning," Bear said grimly, "and they've brought friends." "How many?" Caleb asked, moving to the window. 5, perhaps 6, Bear estimated. "Too many for a direct confrontation." "The mine," Abby suggested immediately. "We can hide there until they leave." Caleb and Bear exchanged a look of grudging approval. "The entrance is less than half a mile north," Caleb confirmed, "but we'll need to move fast." They slipped out the back door, Caleb leading the way through dense underbrush, while Bear obliterated their tracks behind them. The approaching riders were closer now, their voices carrying on the wind. "Burke is with them," Bear said, his keen hearing identifying voices beyond Abby's range. "He knows we were here." The forest thinned as they approached the hillside, revealing a narrow trail that wound upward among rocky outcroppings. Abby's legs burned with the effort of the steep climb, but fear and determination drove her onward. There, Caleb pointed toward what appeared to be a solid rock face partially hidden by overgrown shrubs. Only as they drew closer did Abby see the dark opening, a tunnel entrance less than 5 feet high, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Caleb pushed aside the concealing vegetation, revealing a larger space beyond the initial opening. "In," he ordered, ushering Abby through first. The air inside was cool and damp, tinged with the metallic scent of mineral deposits. After a few yards, the tunnel widened and heightened enough for them to stand upright. Dim light filtered in from the entrance, barely illuminating their surroundings. "I have lanterns stored further in," Caleb said. "Wait here." As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, Abby made out rough-hewn walls supported by timber braces at regular intervals. The floor was surprisingly level, suggesting frequent use in the past. This was no natural cave, but a carefully constructed mine entrance. Caleb returned moments later with 2 oil lanterns, their golden light pushing back the darkness to reveal a complex of tunnels branching off from the main entrance. "We'll go deeper in," he decided. "The first junction has a side tunnel that's easily defensible if they find the entrance." Bear, who had been watching the forest below, nodded in agreement. They've reached the cabin, discovered their companions. They proceeded deeper into the mine, the lanterns casting elongated shadows against the walls. Abby's hand traced the rough stone, wondering if her father had walked these same passages, touched these same rocks. The thought created an unexpected connection across time. strengthening her resolve. At the first junction, Caleb led them down a narrower passage to the right. After about 50 yards, it opened into a small chamber with wooden support beams and the remains of mining equipment, picks, shovels, and an ancient ore cart on rusted rails. "We can defend this position if necessary," he said, setting his lantern on a flat rock. "Only one way in, and the passage is narrow enough to funnel them single file." Bear arranged their weapons and supplies while Abby examined their surroundings. Metal deposits glinted in the lantern light, veins of silver running through the dark stone like frozen lightning. "It's beautiful," she murmured, touching a particularly rich vein. "The Hawthorne lode," Caleb confirmed, "one of the richest silver deposits in the territory. Father discovered it following an old Lakota legend about stars falling to Earth." "That's why it's called Stardust Valley," Abby realized. "The silver looks like fallen stars." "Yes," Bear said, joining them. "Your father understood the sacredness of this place. He mined with respect, never taking more than needed, always giving thanks." A distant shout echoed from the mine entrance, cutting their conversation short. The hunters had found their trail. "Positions," Caleb ordered, extinguishing one lantern and dimming the other to a faint glow. He took up a defensive stance at the chamber entrance, rifle ready, while Bear positioned himself behind a stack of timber with a clear line of fire down the narrow tunnel. Abby drew her revolver, heart pounding as she pressed herself against the wall beside Caleb. The distant voices grew closer, accompanied by the glow of approaching lanterns. "Remember," Caleb whispered, "only if necessary." The minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour as they waited in tense silence. The voices grew louder, then suddenly stopped. A hushed conversation followed, too faint to make out individual words. "They're debating whether to enter," Bear murmured. "Minds frighten the superstitious." After what seemed an eternity, the glow of lanterns receded and the voices faded. Still they waited, unwilling to risk premature relief. "I'll check," Bear finally said, moving silently toward the junction. He returned minutes later, nodding in confirmation. "They've gone. Left a man watching the entrance, but they're searching elsewhere now." "They'll be back," Caleb said grimly, "once they've searched the valley and found nothing." "How long before they give up?" Abby asked. "Burke never gives up," Caleb replied. "He's known for his persistence. And with Coleman's money behind him, he has resources to continue the search indefinitely." "Then we need to change our strategy," Abby decided. "Stop running. Start fighting back." "What do you suggest?" Bear asked, his tone indicating genuine interest rather than skepticism. Abby considered everything she'd learned about Coleman, about his operations, about his weaknesses. "Coleman's power comes from his connections," Abby observed, "political and financial allies who benefit from his schemes." "Senator Aldrich," Caleb noted. "The ledgers reveal money flows to untraceable accounts," Abby continued. "With the complete Red Book, we could connect everything." "The book contains more than maps," Bear confirmed. "It documents all of Thomas's dealings and partners from the beginning." "Coleman must have it," Abby reasoned, "or at least he's still searching for it. The page I copied mentioned acquisition of remaining sections from unaware parties." "The Millers," Caleb concluded. "They had pages but didn't know their significance." A plan began to form in Abby's mind. Dangerous, perhaps foolhardy, but potentially decisive. "We need to go to Cheyenne," she said firmly, "but not to hide, to draw Coleman out." "Explain," Caleb prompted, his expression cautious but interested. "Coleman wants me dead because I can expose his financial crimes. He wants you dead because you're a Thornton and threat to his claim on the mine. He wants the Red Book to complete his control of the territory's resources." Abby's voice grew stronger as the plan crystallized. "What if we let him think he can get all three at once?" "A trap," Bear said, approval evident in his tone. "Using ourselves as bait?" Caleb frowned. "Too risky." "Not if we control the situation," Abby countered. "Coleman is cautious, methodical. He won't come himself, he'll send Burke or others first. But if we can capture one of our trusted men, force them to reveal Coleman's plans, or better yet, send false information back," Caleb continued, warming to the idea. "Draw Coleman himself into a trap where we have the advantage." "Judge Morrison," Abby said. "If we can get to him first, secure his protection and support, Morrison is honest, Bear agreed, but one honest judge against Coleman's network may not be enough. Then we need more, Abby insisted. The newspaper editor in Cheyenne, what was his name? Harrison, Caleb supplied. William Harrison, runs the Cheyenne Chronicle, has a reputation for exposing bowel eruption. If we give Harrison the ledgers, the evidence of murder, the connection to Senator Aldrich, Abby's eyes gleamed with determination. Coleman's allies would abandon him to save themselves. No one wants to be linked to a murderer once the crimes become public. Caleb studied his sister with newfound respect. It could work, but the danger is no greater than continuing to run, Abby finished. Coleman won't stop hunting us. Ever. Our only chance is to end this, once and for all. A silence fell over the chamber as they considered the plan. Finally, Bear spoke, his voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom. The path of the hunter becomes the hunted, he said. It is fitting, but such a trap requires perfect timing, perfect execution. And a way past the man guarding the mine entrance, Caleb added practically. Bear smiled faintly. Leave him to me. The spirits of my ancestors walk these mountains. They will help create a distraction. Night had fallen by the time they emerged from the mine. Bear had slipped out earlier, returning with news that most of the search party had moved to the southern end of the valley, leaving only one man watching the mine entrance. This guard was now slumped unconscious against a tree, bound with his own belt and bandana. He will wake with a headache, nothing more, Bear assured Abby, noting her concerned expression. They moved silently through the forest, following Bear's lead away from the valley. Rather than returning the way they had come, he guided them along a different road, steeper, more challenging, but unlikely to be watched by Coleman's men. We'll avoid the main trails to Cheyenne, Caleb explained as they climbed. Take the high mountain passes, then drop down to the city from the west. How long will it take? Abby asked, wincing as a branch scraped her cheek in the darkness. 3 days if we push hard, he replied. 4 if we're cautious. Cautious, Bear voted immediately. Better to arrive whole than arrive quickly. They traveled through the night, stopping only when the terrain became too treacherous to navigate in darkness. At dawn, they made a cold camp in a rocky outcropping that offered both shelter and a view of the valley they had left behind. In the clear morning light, Abby studied her father's journal while Bear and Caleb took turns watching for pursuit. The journal revealed a man of integrity, intelligence, and deep love for his family. James Thornton's handwriting flowed across the pages, recording everything from mine production figures to his children's first words. One entry in particular caught Abby's attention. Dated 3 weeks before the fire, T. Visited again today, demanding partnership in the mine. Claimed his associates could ensure the railroad route passes through our land, increasing its value tenfold. When I refused, his anger was barely contained. Eleanor fears he may take more drastic steps. I've moved the complete red book to the secure location. Better safe than sorry. Caleb, she called softly. Did Father ever mention a secure location for important documents? Caleb joined her, reading the entry over her shoulder. Not to me. I was too young for such confidences. He might have told Eleanor, Bear suggested, approaching from his lookout position. They shared everything. Or you, Abby suggested. You were his closest friend. Bear shook his head. James kept some secrets, even from me. For protection. Mine and his. Abby returned to the journal, searching for other clues. Several pages later, another entry provided a tantalizing hint. Finish the improvements to E's special place today. She doesn't suspect they serve a dual purpose. The wildflowers will bloom beautifully next spring, hiding what lies beneath. Mother's special place, Abby murmured, somewhere with wildflowers. The entire valley blooms with wildflowers in spring, Caleb said, frustration evident in his voice. But not all would be E's special place, Abby reasoned. Something specific to Eleanor, something meaningful. Bear's weathered face creased in concentration. There was a small garden separate from the main house. Eleanor tended it personally, allowing no one else to work there. James built a stone bench for her, facing the mountains. She would sit there in the evenings, watching the sunset with baby Abigail in her arms. That must be it, Abby said excitedly. The secure location could be beneath that bench, hidden among the wildflowers. We can't go back, Caleb said firmly. Not with Burke and his men still searching the valley. But if the complete red book is there, Abby began, then it has remained hidden for 20 years, Bear interrupted gently. It will remain hidden a while longer. When the time is right, we will return. Reluctantly, Abby conceded the point. The red book would be a powerful weapon against Coleman, but it wasn't worth risking their lives when they already possessed substantial evidence against him. They continued their journey following Bear's lead through high mountain passes where few travelers ventured. The terrain was challenging, steep slopes, narrow ledges, dense forest alternating with exposed rock faces. But Bear moved with the confidence of one who had traveled these paths many times before, finding game trails and ancient footpaths invisible to less experienced eyes. On the second night, they camped in a sheltered grove beside a small alpine lake. The air was thin and cold at this elevation, prompting them to risk a small fire. As flames pushed back the darkness, Bear prepared a simple meal of dried meat and foraged greens, supplemented with the last of their bread. No sign of pursuit, Caleb reported, returning from his perimeter check. I think we've lost them, at least temporarily. Burke will return to Silver Creek to report to Coleman, Bear predicted. Then the search will widen. Coleman has resources we do not. But we have knowledge he doesn't, Abby pointed out. We know who he really is, what he's done. And soon, everyone else will too. Assuming we reach Cheyenne safely, Caleb reminded her, assuming Morrison helps us, assuming Harrison publishes the story. You doubt the plan? Abby asked, studying her brother's face in the firelight. Caleb was silent for a moment, staring into the flames. I doubt that men like Coleman ever truly face justice, he finally said. In my experience, the wealthy and connected protect each other. That's why we need to make it public, Abby insisted. So widespread that no one can ignore it, not even his allies. And if that fails? Caleb's eyes met hers across the fire, their depths reflecting old pain and harder lessons. Abby understood then the fundamental difference in their approaches. Having lived with the knowledge of their parents' murder for 20 years, having searched fruitlessly for justice through official channels, Caleb had lost faith in the system. His question wasn't hypothetical. It was preparation for what he viewed as the likely outcome. If it fails, she said slowly, then we use the last option. But only then, Caleb, only as a last resort. The unspoken hung between them, the possibility of taking justice into their own hands, of ending Coleman's threat permanently. It was a line Abby desperately hoped they wouldn't have to cross, but she recognized the steel in her brother's gaze. For him, vengeance had been a companion for 2 decades. Bear, observing the silent exchange, spoke with quiet authority. The path of blood brings its own shadows. I have walked it and know its cost. He touched the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, usually hidden by his long hair. Choose carefully which spirits you invite to walk beside you. The warning hung heavy in the night air. Eventually, Caleb nodded, a slight but significant concession. Justice first, he agreed, but I won't let him escape again. Not this time. Abby reached across the space between them, placing her hand on her brother's arm. Together, she promised. Whatever comes, we face it together. For the first time since their reunion, something in Caleb's expression truly softened, the wall he had built around himself showing its first crack. Together, he echoed, covering her hand with his own. Bear nodded approvingly, seeing in this moment the healing of a wound 20 years in the making. The Thornton spirits are pleased, he said. I feel them in the wind tonight. Abby glanced around instinctively as if expecting to see ghostly figures among the trees. The mountain night was indeed unusually active, branches swaying, leaves rustling, creating an almost musical sound. Get some rest, Caleb advised, noticing her weariness. I'll take first watch. Tomorrow we begin the descent toward Cheyenne. As Abby settled into her bedroll, the events of the past days swirled in her mind, discovering her true identity, finding her brother, visiting her birthplace. So much had changed so quickly. The bookkeeper from Boston seemed like a different person now, someone she had left behind along with Silver Creek. Sleep eventually claimed her, bringing dreams of wildflowers and silver streams, of a stone bench facing mountains, and a mother's gentle hands guiding hers to place seeds in fertile earth. Dawn broke clear and cold on their 3rd day of travel. As predicted, they began the descent from the high country, following a steep trail that wound between massive boulders and stands of pine. By midday, the air had warmed considerably as they lost elevation, and the terrain gradually softened. "We're entering more traveled lands," Bear warned as they paused to rest the horses. "From here, we must be vigilant. Coleman may have men watching the approaches to Cheyenne." "How far to the city?" Abby asked, stretching to ease the stiffness in her back. Days on horseback had left her sore despite her improving skill. "We'll reach the outskirts by nightfall," Caleb replied, "but we won't enter until we've scouted the situation. Coleman will have informants watching for us." "We need allies," Abby said thoughtfully. "Someone in Cheyenne who can help us move safely through the city, get messages to Judge Morrison and Harrison." "Clara Jenkins," Bear suggested, "the widow who runs the boarding house near the courthouse. She has no love for Coleman after he foreclosed on her husband's ranch." "I know her," Caleb nodded. "Stayed at her place when I first arrived in the territory. She's discreet, well-connected." With this destination in mind, they continued their journey. The landscape gradually transformed from wilderness to the outskirts of civilization. Scattered homesteads, fenced pastures, well-worn roads. They kept to the less traveled routes, avoiding interaction with the occasional farmers or freight wagons they spotted in the distance. As sunset approached, the buildings of Cheyenne appeared on the horizon, a growing frontier city that served as both territorial capital and railway hub. Smoke from hundreds of chimneys hung in the air, and even from a distance, the sounds of urban life carried faintly to their ears. "We'll camp here tonight," Caleb decided, indicating a small grove of trees beside a stream. "Approach the city in the morning when we can better assess the situation." They made camp with practiced efficiency, keeping the fire small and well shielded. After a simple meal, Caleb spread a rough map of Cheyenne on the ground between them, using stones to weight the corners. "Clara's boarding house is here," he indicated, 3 blocks from the courthouse. "Judge Morrison's chambers are on the 2nd floor, east side. The Cheyenne Chronicle offices are 5 blocks north." "Coleman will have men watching both locations," Bear predicted. "He knows our likely allies." "Then we need to get a message to Clara first," Abby reasoned. "Have her arrange a secure meeting place." "I can enter the city undetected," Bear offered. "My people trade there regularly." "One more Lakota will draw no special attention." Caleb nodded reluctantly. "It's risky, but we have few alternatives. If you're not back by noon tomorrow, we'll assume the worst and change our approach." "I will return," Bear said with quiet confidence. The spirits still have work for this old man. They spent the evening refining their plan, anticipating possible complications, preparing contingencies. If Bear succeeded in contacting Clara, she would send a trustworthy person to guide them into the city through less watched roads. If he failed, they would wait for darkness and attempt to enter separately, using different paths. As night deepened around them, Bear began preparing for his mission. He changed into simpler clothing that would mark him as a trading Lakota, wrapping his distinctive silver-streaked hair beneath a plain headband. He would leave before dawn, traveling light and swift. "Be careful," Abby told him as he made his final preparations. "Coleman's men won't hesitate to shoot a Lakota they suspect of helping us." Bear's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "I walked these lands before Coleman was born. I will walk them long after he is dust." He touched her cheek in a surprisingly tender gesture. "Keep your brother from rash action until I return." After Bear retired to rest before his early departure, Abby and Caleb sat together by the dying fire. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky in breathtaking profusion. "Do you remember them clearly?" Abby asked suddenly. "Our parents?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. "Some days the memories are sharp as glass," he finally said. "Other times they slip away like smoke. 20 years is a long time." "Tell me about them," Abby requested softly. "Help me know them through your memories." Something in her plea seemed to reach past Caleb's usual reserve. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the stars as he began to speak. "Father was tall, taller than me now. He had a laugh you could hear across the valley, and hands that were always busy building something, fixing something. He played the fiddle terribly, but with great enthusiasm." A ghost of a smile touched Caleb's lips. Mother would cover her ears and pretend to be in agony, but her eyes always danced when he played. "And Mother?" Abby prompted when he fell silent. "Beautiful, strong. She could outride most men and quote Shakespeare while mending fences. She had a garden where she grew herbs and flowers, practical and beautiful together, like her." Caleb's voice softened. She sang to you every night, old lullabies from her childhood in Pennsylvania. Each detail was precious to Abby, filling in the outline of the parents she couldn't remember. Were they happy? She asked. Truly happy? Yes, Caleb said without hesitation. They argued sometimes. Mother thought father too trusting, especially of Thomas. But they loved each other deeply, and they adored us. What about you? Were you happy as a child before? I was, Caleb admitted, the simple statement seeming to surprise even him. I had freedom, adventure, parents who encouraged my curiosity. I learned to track from Bear, to read from Mother, to build from Father. It was a good life. The unspoken hung between them. A good life, violently stolen. 2 decades of separation, of searching, of loss that could never truly be restored. We'll make him pay, Abby said quietly. Not just for us, but for everyone he's hurt. Caleb's expression hardened once more. The brief glimpse of the boy he had been disappearing beneath the man he'd become. Yes, we will. They sat in silence after that, each lost in private thoughts as the fire burned down to embers and the night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Bear departed before first light, melting into the pre-dawn shadows with silent efficiency. Abby and Caleb spent the morning in tense waiting, preparing their few possessions for quick movement if necessary. Tell me about Judge Morrison, Abby requested as they checked and rechecked their weapons. Can we trust him completely? As much as anyone, Caleb replied. He's built a reputation for incorruptibility. Coleman has tried to bribe him, threaten him, even blackmail him, all without success. And Harrison, the newspaper editor? Ambitious, principled. Lost his brother to one of Coleman's land schemes. So it's personal for him. He'll publish the truth if we can get it to him and protect it from being suppressed. Abby nodded, mentally cataloging their potential allies and the resources they might provide. Judge Morrison could issue warrants, provide legal protection. Harrison could make the evidence public, turn opinion against Coleman. Clara could offer shelter, local intelligence. As noon approached with no sign of Bear, anxiety began to gnaw at her. Should we move closer to the city, she suggested. Be ready if he sends someone? Caleb shook his head. Not yet. Bear wouldn't expect us to change position before the agreed time. They continued their vigil as the sun climbed higher. Noon came and went. By mid-afternoon, Caleb's expression had darkened considerably. Something's wrong, he finally acknowledged. Bear would have returned or sent word by now. Coleman could have captured him, Abby suggested, voicing their shared fear. Or he could be delayed for innocent reasons, Caleb countered, though his tone lacked conviction. We'll give him until sunset, then implement the alternate plan. The waiting became nearly unbearable as afternoon slowly gave way to evening. They packed their belongings, saddled the horses, prepared for rapid movement in any direction. Just as the sun touched the western horizon, a sound caught their attention. Approaching hoofbeats, moving at a steady pace rather than the gallop of pursuit. Caleb immediately positioned himself with rifle ready, gesturing for Abby to take cover behind a large tree. A lone rider appeared on the trail from Cheyenne, a woman on a bay gelding, her posture straight and confident. As she drew closer, Abby could make out more details. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, wearing a simple riding dress and carrying no visible weapons. Caleb kept his rifle trained on her until she was within clear view. Then, surprisingly, he lowered the weapon. Clara, he said, stepping forward, where's Bear? The woman reined in her horse, her face grave. In my cellar with a bullet in his shoulder. Coleman's men were watching for him. It's a miracle he made it to my door. Abby emerged from her hiding place, alarm evident in her expression. Is he alive? Yes, Clara assured her. My late husband was a doctor. I have some skill with wounds. Bear will recover, but he's in no condition to travel. And you came in his place, Caleb observed, a note of admiration in his voice. Clara nodded, her chin lifting slightly. Bear said you needed allies. I've buried 2 husbands and 3 sons. Coleman took my ranch, my livelihood. I have nothing left to lose and every reason to help bring him down. It could be dangerous, Abby warned. Something hard flashed in Clara's eyes. Danger and I are old acquaintances, Miss Thornton. Now, shall we continue this discussion on the trail? My absence will be noted if I'm gone too long. Caleb helped Abby mount her horse, then swung into his own saddle. What's the situation in Cheyenne? He asked as they fell in beside Clara. Coleman arrived yesterday with his personal guard, she reported. He's staying at the Grand Hotel, meeting with Senator Aldrich and other investors. They're finalizing the railroad contracts. And his men? Caleb pressed. Everywhere. Watching the courthouse, the newspaper offices, the telegraph. That red-headed devil Burke is leading them, offering rewards for information about dangerous fugitives who murdered poor, innocent Ezra Coleman's employees. Has he mentioned us by name? Abby asked. Not publicly. But his men are showing your descriptions to every hotel, boarding house, and saloon in the city. This confirmed what they had feared, a coordinated manhunt with Coleman himself directing operations from Cheyenne. Their task had just become significantly more difficult. Bear said you had a plan, Clara continued, one that needs Judge Morrison and William Harrison. We have evidence of Coleman's crimes, Abby explained. Fraud, murder, and his hidden past. Clara's eyebrows rose. Hidden past? Coleman is Thomas Thornton, Caleb said simply. Our uncle, our parents' murderer. Clara absorbed this with a slow nod. I always sensed something false about him. Too polished, too careful. She considered for a moment. Judge Morrison is sympathetic to your cause. He's been building a case against Coleman for years but never had enough evidence. Harrison is more complicated. How so? Abby asked. He's ambitious. Breaking this story would make his career, but he's also cautious. Coleman tried to buy his newspaper last year. When Harrison refused, accidents started happening. A fire in his print shop, his son beaten by unknown assailants. So he might not help us, Caleb concluded. Oh, he'll help, Clara said with certainty, but he'll need guarantees, protection for his family, ironclad evidence, assurances that Coleman can't squirm free. They rode in thoughtful silence as twilight deepened around them. The lights of Cheyenne grew more distinct ahead, a constellation of human habitation spread across the plain. We can't all enter the city together, Clara said eventually, too conspicuous. I know a place about a mile south where you can wait safely. There's an abandoned line shack on what used to be my property. Coleman hasn't bothered with it since taking the land. And then, Caleb prompted, I'll bring Morrison to you tonight. If he's convinced, we'll approach Harrison together. The judge's presence will reassure him. It was a solid plan, better than they could have hoped for after Bear's injury. As they approached the outskirts of Cheyenne, Clara led them away from the main road, following a barely visible track through tall grass to a dilapidated structure nestled in a small copse of trees. It's not much, she apologized as they dismounted, but it's out of sight, and no one comes here anymore. The line shack was indeed humble, a single room with a sagging roof, broken windows, and a door that hung crookedly on rusted hinges, but it offered shelter and concealment, which was all they needed. I'll bring food when I return with Morrison, Clara promised. Should be about 2 hours after full dark. If I'm not back by midnight, assume something's gone wrong and leave immediately. Head east toward Fort Laramie. I have friends there who can help you. With that, she mounted her horse and rode toward Cheyenne, leaving Abby and Caleb to prepare for the next critical phase of their plan. Can we trust her? Abby asked as they arranged their meager possessions in the shack. Bear trusts her, Caleb replied. That's enough for me. They settled in to wait, cleaning weapons, organizing evidence, preparing for whatever might come. As darkness fell completely, Abby found herself growing increasingly tense. So much depended on the next few hours. Their safety, their chance at justice, their very future. What if Coleman already has Morrison under surveillance, she wondered aloud. What if Clara is discovered helping us? Then we adapt, Caleb said simply. We've come too far to turn back now. Outside, an owl hooted softly. The night deepened around the small shack, wrapping it in darkness and silence. Somewhere in Cheyenne, Ezra Coleman, Thomas Thornton, was perhaps raising a glass with Senator Aldrich, celebrating their imminent triumph, unaware that the children whose lives he had destroyed were now within striking distance, preparing to bring his world crashing down. Abby touched the bracelet at her wrist. For you, Mother, she whispered. For you, Father. Justice is coming at last. The hours crawled by as Abby and Caleb waited in the dilapidated line shack. Every distant sound made them tense, hoofbeats that might be Clara returning or Coleman's men discovering them, voices carried on the night wind that might herald salvation or doom. "It's nearly midnight," Abby said, checking the pocket watch Caleb had given her. "If Clara doesn't come soon." "We wait until midnight exactly," Caleb replied, his voice tight with tension. "Not a minute less." Just as hope began to fade, the soft nicker of a horse outside alerted them. Caleb immediately positioned himself beside the door, rifle ready, while Abby doused their small lamp. The unmistakable sound of multiple horses approached, not just one. A gentle knock on the door, followed by Clara's whispered voice. "It's safe. We've come." Caleb opened the door cautiously. Clara stood there, flanked by two men, one elderly with a distinguished bearing and silver hair, the other younger with spectacles and an ink-stained hand that marked him as someone who spent his life with pen and paper. "Judge Morrison," Clara introduced the older man, "and William Harrison of the Chronicle. They've agreed to hear you out." The men entered, glancing warily around the shabby interior. Judge Morrison removed his hat, revealing a high forehead crossed with deep lines of thought and experience. "Mrs. Jenkins has told us a rather extraordinary tale," he said, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "I've been building a case against Coleman for years, but never had enough evidence to bring charges. She claims you have what I need." "And more," Abby replied, retrieving the ledger pages and documents from her satchel. "Financial records showing fraudulent transactions, evidence connecting Coleman to multiple murders, and proof of his true identity." "True identity?" Harrison leaned forward, journalist instinct clearly piqued. "Ezra Coleman is Thomas Thornton," Caleb stated flatly. 20 years ago, he murdered his brother's family to gain control of the Hawthorne silver mine, or almost all of them. "And you can prove this?" Morrison asked skeptically. Abby spread the documents on a rickety table. "These ledgers show Coleman withdrawing funds from the accounts of deceased landowners, then using shell companies to purchase their properties. The pattern is clear once you understand his system." Morrison examined the pages with the careful eye of a man accustomed to weighing evidence. "Circumstantial but compelling. What about the murders?" Caleb produced the clipping about the Thornton fire and the letter regarding the Thornton child. "And who is this Thornton child mentioned here?" Morrison asked. Abby extended her wrist, showing the silver bracelet. "I am. Abigail Thornton, daughter of James and Eleanor Thornton. Coleman, Thomas, believed he'd eliminated the entire family, but I was rescued and taken east." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "You realize these are extraordinary claims, Miss Thornton. Coleman is one of the most powerful men in the territory." "Which is why we need your help," Caleb interjected. "We have more evidence at the cabin in Stardust Valley, our birthplace. Father's journal, land deeds, birth records." Harrison, who had been silently taking notes, finally spoke. "If what you're saying is true, this would be the biggest scandal Wyoming has seen. But Coleman has threatened my family before. What protection can you offer?" "The protection of the law," Morrison said firmly. "If these documents are authentic, and I believe they are, I can issue warrants for Coleman's arrest immediately. Once he's in custody, his ability to threaten others diminishes considerably." "And if the law fails?" Caleb asked, voicing the question that had hung between him and Abby. Morrison fixed him with a stern gaze. "The law doesn't fail, Mr. Thornton. Sometimes those who administer it do, but I am not one of those men." A silent communication passed between Caleb and Abby. This was the moment of decision, to trust the system they had both come to doubt or to take justice into their own hands. "We'll trust you, Judge," Abby said finally, "but we need to move quickly. Coleman is finalizing the railroad contracts tomorrow. Once those are signed, his power and connections will be even greater." "Then we have no time to lose," Morrison replied, gathering the documents. "I'll prepare the warrants tonight. Harrison will hold the story until Coleman is in custody, then publish everything." Clara, who had been keeping watch at the window, suddenly stiffened. "Riders coming, at least feet moving fast." "Burke," Caleb said grimly, reaching for his rifle. "No time to run," Clara assessed quickly. "They've seen the light." Morrison straightened his coat. "Let them come. I am still chief judge of this territory." "With all due respect, Judge," Caleb said, "your authority means little to men like Burke." Abby made a swift decision. "Clara, take Judge Morrison and Harrison out the back. Get them to safety. We'll hold off Burke and his men. I won't leave you, Clara protested. You must, Abby insisted. The evidence needs to reach the courthouse. That's all that matters now. After a moment's hesitation, Clara nodded. There's a cellar beneath the floor, she said, pointing to a worn rug. Hidden entrance. It connects to a drainage tunnel that leads to the creek bed. You can escape that way once we're clear. The hoofbeats grew louder as Clara guided Morrison and Harrison out the rear door. Caleb pulled back the rug, revealing a trap door built into the floorboards. Always have an escape route, he muttered, checking that it opened properly before covering it again. Bear taught me that. They positioned themselves on either side of the front windows, weapons ready. The riders surrounded the shack, their silhouettes visible in the moonlight. Hawthorne! Burke's voice carried easily through the thin walls. We know you're in there. Come out or we burn the place down. 5 against 2, Abby whispered. Not good odds. We don't need to win, Caleb replied softly. Just buy time. Raising his voice, Caleb called back. What do you want, Burke? Coleman wants a word with you and the girl. Come peacefully, and no one gets hurt. Caleb laughed without humor. Like the Millers? Like our parents? Coleman's word means nothing. A tense silence followed. Then Burke's voice again, harder now. You have 1 minute to come out, or we open fire. Caleb and Abby exchanged a glance, a lifetime of separation and reunion, of loss and discovery, passing between them in that single look. Ready? Caleb asked. Abby nodded, gripping her revolver. Together. The minute passed. A warning shot splintered the window frame above Abby's head. Then hell broke loose as Burke's men opened fire on the shack, bullets tearing through the thin wood walls. Caleb returned fire strategically, not aiming to kill, but to keep the attackers pinned down. Abby did the same, remembering his lessons on making each shot count. After what seemed an eternity, but was likely only minutes, a new sound pierced the chaos. Whistle blasts and shouted commands that didn't belong to Burke's men. Sheriff's deputies, Caleb identified, risking a glance out the shattered window. The gunfire from Burke's men faltered, then ceased as they found themselves surrounded by a dozen armed lawmen. Rowan Burke, a commanding voice called out. Drop your weapons. You're under arrest by order of Judge Morrison. Burke's response was another volley of gunfire, but it was brief and poorly aimed. The deputies returned fire with disciplined precision, and soon the sounds of combat were replaced by the moans of wounded men and the jingle of handcuffs. Caleb and Abby remained in their defensive positions until a knock came at the door. Mr. and Miss Thornton, Sheriff Taylor, Cheyenne County, Judge Morrison sent us. You're safe now. The next morning dawned clear and bright over Cheyenne. Abby sat in Judge Morrison's chambers, watching through the window as the city came to life, unaware of the dramatic events unfolding in their midst. Morrison entered, his face showing the weariness of a man who had not slept. Coleman has been arrested, he announced without preamble, along with Senator Aldrich and 3 other conspirators. The evidence was overwhelming once we knew where to look. Relief washed over Abby, but it was tempered with caution. He has powerful friends. Had, Morrison corrected. The first edition of Harrison's newspaper hit the streets an hour ago. Every detail of Coleman's crimes, his true identity, the murders, all laid bare for the public to see. His friends are scrambling to distance themselves now. The door opened again and Caleb entered with Clara. His expression was lighter than Abby had yet seen it, as if a burden of decades had finally lifted. Bear? Abby asked immediately. Recovering well, Clara assured her. The bullet passed clean through. He's already talking about returning to Stardust Valley. Morrison cleared his throat. I've reviewed all the documentation you provided. The land deeds, birth records, and your father's journal establish beyond doubt that you are the legal heirs to the Thornton estate, including Stardust Valley and the Hawthorne silver mine. And Coleman? Caleb asked, the name still bitter on his tongue. Will stand trial for multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy, Morrison replied. Given the evidence, conviction is certain. He'll hang, Mr. Thornton. Abby expected to feel triumph or at least satisfaction at these words. Instead, she felt only a profound weariness and the first tentative stirrings of peace. When can we see him? She asked. Morrison's eyebrows rose in surprise. Coleman, I wouldn't advise that. We need to, Caleb said, understanding Abby's intent without explanation. To end this properly. After a moment's consideration, Morrison nodded. I'll arrange it. This afternoon at the jail. The Cheyenne jail was a solid stone building, one of the few permanent structures in a city still dominated by wooden construction. Abby and Caleb followed the sheriff down a narrow corridor lit by gas lamps, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. 5 minutes, the sheriff said, stopping before a heavy iron door. No more. He's been unpredictable since his arrest. Inside the cell, Ezra Coleman, Thomas Thornton, sat on a narrow cot, his once immaculate clothing rumpled, his silver-streaked hair disheveled. When he looked up at their entrance, Abby was struck by how ordinary he seemed. Not the monster of her imagination, but simply a man, albeit one warped by decades of greed and hatred. Recognition flickered in his eyes as they settled on Caleb, then widened in shock when they moved to Abby. Impossible, he whispered. You died in the fire. Both of you. You failed, Thomas, Caleb said, his voice controlled despite the emotion Abby knew must be raging within him. Just as you failed at everything except causing pain. Coleman's face contorted with sudden rage. You have no idea what you're talking about, boy. Your father was a fool who didn't deserve what he had. The mine, the valley, Eleanor. Our mother, Abby interrupted, the pieces suddenly aligning. You were in love with her. Coleman's expression confirmed her intuition before he could mask it. She should have been mine, he said bitterly. She chose wrong. And for that, you murdered an entire family? Abby asked, her voice steady despite her disgust. I built something, Coleman shouted, rising to his feet. I took a worthless patch of land and made it into an empire. What would James have done with it? Shared it with the Indians? Given away the profits? I deserved everything I took. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between Coleman and Abby. We didn't come for explanations or confessions, he said coldly. We came to tell you that it's over. The valley, the mine, the legacy, it all returns to the Thorntons where it belongs. Coleman lunged forward, only to be brought up short by the chains binding his wrists to the wall. You think this is over? He snarled. I still have friends, resources. You'll never be safe. Never. Enough, Abby said, the single word cutting through his tirade. You've taken 20 years from us, Thomas. You'll take no more. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the man who had destroyed her family. Our father would have forgiven you, she said softly, but we're not him. As they walked away, Coleman's shouts followed them down the corridor, gradually fading into incoherent rage and finally silence. Outside in the clear Wyoming sunlight, Abby took a deep breath, feeling truly free for the first time since fleeing Silver Creek. What now? She asked Caleb as they walked toward Clara's boarding house. Now we rebuild, he replied. The cabin first, then maybe the main house eventually. The mine needs inspection before operations can resume. There's much to do. We, Abby asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Caleb glanced at her, his habitual solemnity softening. Unless you'd prefer to return to Boston. Never, she said firmly. Stardust Valley is home now. It always was. I just didn't know it. 2 years later, the wildflowers of Stardust Valley painted the landscape in a riot of colors: purple lupine, golden sunflowers, crimson Indian paintbrush, and the delicate white star-shaped blooms that had given the valley its name. Abby knelt in her mother's garden, carefully transplanting seedlings around the restored stone bench that overlooked the valley. The past 2 years had been busy ones. Coleman had been convicted and hanged, his criminal empire dismantled, his ill-gotten gains returned to their rightful owners. Clara Jenkins had reclaimed her ranch and now ran it successfully with the help of her nephew. William Harrison's newspaper had flourished, his coverage of the Coleman conspiracy earning him national recognition. And the Thorntons had come home. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house, though smaller and more practical than the one that had burned 20 years earlier. The Hawthorne mine operated again, though on a limited scale that respected both the land and the Lakota traditions. Caleb had emerged from his decades of isolation, becoming a respected voice in territorial affairs and an advocate for fair treatment of the native peoples. Bear had recovered fully from his wound and now divided his time between the Lakota village and Stardust Valley, teaching a new generation the old ways while embracing the possibility of a better future. As for Abby, she had found her place at last. She managed the business side of the mine, kept the books with the same precision she had once applied to Coleman's ledgers, and had finally opened the small bookshop she had always dreamed of, not in San Francisco, but in the growing settlement near Stardust Valley. And she had found something else unexpected. Love in the person of Michael Hayes, one of Morrison's deputies who had helped rescue them at the line shack. Their wedding was planned for the autumn. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Bear and Caleb rode into view, returning from their trip to the Lakota village. Bear dismounted with the grace that belied his years, while Caleb, still more comfortable on horseback than off, remained in the saddle. "Sister," he called, "we have news." Abby rose, brushing soil from her skirts as she walked to meet them. "Good news, I hope?" Bear smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "The best. The council has agreed to the partnership. The mine will operate under joint stewardship, Thornton and Lakota together as your father would have wished. And there's more," Caleb added. "The territorial governor has approved our petition. Stardust Valley is officially recognized as a protected heritage site. No railroad, no development. Just as it is, forever." Abby felt tears spring to her eyes. Tears not of sorrow but of completion, of promises kept and wrongs finally righted. "Mother and father would be proud," she said softly. Caleb dismounted, coming to stand beside her. Together they looked out over the valley that had been their birthright and was now their legacy. "They are proud," Bear said with quiet certainty. "Their spirits walk this valley still. Can you not feel them in the wind?" And as the breeze rustled through the wildflowers, carrying the scent of sage and pine and open sky, Abby thought perhaps she could.